Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the 2 p.m. agenda this Thursday, February 25th of the Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee. This is one of our last, if not the last, hearing we will have before first crossover, where the Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee is the last referral on the measure as we work toward our first crossover deadline, where the House and the Senate switch bills and then begin the process all over again. My thanks to everyone who is here today. I do want to go over a few ground rules as we begin our proceedings. I'm very grateful to have everybody here, and I thank you for being here. I would like to also ask that you extend each other and the committee will extend to you. Aloha, and please observe decorum. That will help us in our proceedings today. It's both my fervent request, but also my expectation. I think that's one of the things that makes Hawaii a very special place. Also, for our first time testifiers, there will be a 2-minute time limit. That's to help us ensure that we're able to consider all of the important measures on today's agenda. Once you reach your 2 minutes, I will ask you to start to summarize your point. With that, I will happily begin today's proceedings with our first measure, HB 221, relating to condominiums. This amends the requirements for a condo association standard proxy form by deleting the option for the condo owner to give the proxy to the board as a whole, and it also clarifies that no managing agent, resident manager, or their employees or the association's employees shall solicit proxies from any unit owner of the associations. First off, we have Steve Glanstein with the Hawaii State Association of Parliamentarians in opposition.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. I've submitted written testimony, and just a quick note to supplement on page 3. There are a couple extra bills that also died there. This has had a long history of being deferred or not being heard, and so I'd ask that you do that even in this session. I believe the same issue for item number 1 was deferred. Item number 2, the absolute prohibition on solicitation, could actually act to prevent even a managing agent from sending a notice and proxies. So we are opposed to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Lila Moore with the Condo Owners Coalition of Hawaii in support.
Aloha, I'm Lila.
I'm sorry, I was just saying hi. Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, I'm sorry too. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to testify. I'm Lila Mower, leader of Hui Oiaio, the Condo Owners Coalition of Hawaii, and I strongly support House Bill 221. The proxy assignment option to the board as a whole serves no other option than to amplify the power of the so-called majority of the board, which can be as few as 2 or 3 owners to determine for the entire association who their directors will be, while simultaneously depriving and defeating candidates who may have garnered even more individual owners' votes than these incumbent directors. Further, these incumbent directors retain their seats by using proxies, which are often solicited by association and management employees whose livelihoods depend on the incumbents who are seeking re-election. Some directors rule the associations for years, even decades, with little regard for owners, as these owners are not their constituents. When the board as a whole is a proxy option, the board's constituency is itself and not the members of the association. Eliminating the proxy assignment option to the board as a whole is opposed by those who claim that the measure will remove an owner's right to choose. However, House Bill 221 still preserves the option for an owner to assign his proxy to the board, but to those owners present, to the directors present at the meeting, with the vote to be shared with each director receiving an equal percentage, or to assign his proxy to a specific individual, or to allow that proxy to be used for quorum purposes only. Thus, the argument to those who oppose House Bill 221 is specious. When the option to the board of the whole was created in the mid-'80s, there was concern about its abuse, and since then we have recognized its abuse. We noticed too, in looking at testimonies of 2019-2020 House Bill 341, which was very similar to this year's House Bill 221, and then looking at testimonies for House Bill 495, again, this year's for each bill 495, there's a clear divide between testimonies in opposition of those measures, removing the option to the board as a whole by those who oppose or retained by or who are employed or retained by the incumbent boards on one side in opposition, and then on the other side in support of the measure to eliminate this option by owners. House Bill 221 allows for competitive but fair election of directors who are representative owners and protects the most important right given to condominium owners, the right to have fair and honest elections. Please pass this measure. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We also have individual testimony and support from Jeff Sedino.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jeff Sedino, and I support this bill and the removal of voting as a whole. Owners will not be harmed by removing voting as a whole. If voting as a whole is removed, owners are still 100% free to vote for whoever they want. I think that every vote should be earned. Instead, the only votes that matter are the votes of one or two specific board members who do exert their control over the rest of the board. Supporters of voting as a whole say that the board is in the best position to know what is best for the association. And while that sounds good, it is just a marketing soundbite. As a quick example, this past January at our last association meeting, 3 people were running for 2 positions on the board. One person does not even live there and did not even go to the association meeting. One person has only lived there for 1 year and was recruited by the resident manager and voted onto the board in between association meetings to fill a vacancy. The third person has lived there for decades and has served on the board for decades. Unfortunately, she complains about the conflict of interest of having the wife of the resident manager on the board. And she also complains about the resident manager not doing his basic job responsibilities. The result of the vote, as I'm sure you can imagine, was 45% for the first person, 45% for the second person, and only 10% for the third person who actually was there. For that second person, the newest person, as soon as she was elected, she asked how she could do as little as possible because she was too busy with her normal life. Obviously, voting as a whole did not get the most qualified person onto the board. I think very obviously, voting as a whole is a way to make it easier for people who are in power to stay in power, and it promotes a culture of cronyism. It is not at all clear to me what benefits voting as a whole achieves, but it is very obvious to me the potential for abuse that voting as a whole encourages. Because of this, I support this bill and the removal of voting as a whole. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Members, please note that we also have additional testimony both in support and opposition from organizations as well as individuals on this measure. That's the extent of our testifiers who indicated that they would be present today. Members, do you have any questions on HB 221? Okay, seeing no questions on HB 221, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 305, relating to condominiums. This removes the publication requirement and permits the board of directors of a condo association to proceed directly to the sale, storage, donation, or disposal of personality that has been abandoned in or on common elements of a condo when the identity or address of the owner is unknown. On HB 305, we have our first testifier indicating that they will be present in her individual capacity, Sandy Wong, in support.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, good morning. Good afternoon, Chair Johansson. This is Sandy Wong. I am speaking on my individual capacity as a condo owner and a condo resident. I strongly support this bill. Unfortunately, lots of residents in condos, instead of utilizing the city's bulk pickup items mechanism, will just bring their junks down to the common areas of the condo. And in order for the condo to remove it, we have to go through this publication process, which is expensive and which is arduous. So I strongly support this measure, and I ask that you pass it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, please note that that is the extent of our present testifiers on HB 305. Members, any questions to Sandy? Okay, seeing no questions, then we'll move on to our next agenda item. This is HB 307 relating to common interest communities. It authorizes planned community associations and condo associations to conduct electronic meetings and electronic or machine voting in a state of emergency or local state of emergency, regardless of what a planned community association's documents or condo associations bylaws or declarations provide. On HB 307, we have the Hawaii State Association of Parliamentarians, Steve Glanstein, with comments.
Good afternoon again, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. By written testimony is referencing HB 599 with amendments which can accomplish substantially the same thing. So I'd ask that you consider it in that light. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have the Community Associations Institute, Phil Nerney, in support.
Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members, thank you. My name is Phil Nerney. I testify in support of this measure, but with the recognition that there may be another vehicle that is more appropriate. I share Mr. Glanstein's perspective that amendments are in order regardless of the vehicle, and a number of interested persons have proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's the extent of our organizational and individual testimony. Please note that there are other organizations and individuals, both in support and opposition on HB 307. Members, any questions on HB 307? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to a measure that contains much of what is in 307, but addresses some other issues as well, and perhaps a little bit more holistically. HB 599, this is relating to association governance. And this specifies notice requirements for a regular, annual, or special meeting of a cooperative housing corporation. It allows the annual meetings and election of the board members of a cooperative housing corporation, planned community association, condo association to be conducted by video conferencing in the event of a pandemic or other similarly unforeseen circumstances that prevents owners from physically gathering for a meeting. First off, on HB 599, again, we have the Hawaii State Association of Parliamentarians in support, Steve Glanstein.
Hello again, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. Let me see if this video works. Maybe I can see if that works a little bit.
Yeah, it works. Nice to see you.
Okay. Monitor. Hello. Hello, Chair. Something works here. Okay, that's good news. Okay. Technology, it works until the warranty's up. So, so just testifying in support, we've worked together, several of us, to put proposed amendment, several community leaders, attorneys, myself. We're trying to make something that is going to really work for the community. There were a few points that the chapter on community housing corporations is really not necessary. And with respect to the planned community associations, we don't really see the tremendous need, but we did want to make sure it was clear that they could have annual and special meetings to be conducted by internet, teleconference, or other electronic transmission technology. The more difficult one that we addressed was Chapter 514B and Section 514B 121, and we've got a proposal to basically allow for the electronic meetings and allow other options there. And so we've submitted a testimony, and we've submitted a proposed amendment for your consideration. Certainly available for any questions or any details that the committee members wish to have answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. We also, again, have the Community Associations Institute, Phil Nerney, in support.
Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members, I concur with Mr. Glanstein's testimony. I would just add that some of the proposed suggestions are to key language to align with Robert's Rules of Order. And with that, I would simply say that we support.
Thank you. Do we have? Dale? Okay. Members, that is the extent of our testifiers who've indicated that they would be present in today's virtual hearing. Please note, on this measure, we have only support from other organizations as well as individuals on HB 599. Please also note in the testimony the overlapping of the same proffered amendments in multiple stakeholders' testimony that testified today. They are the same amendments. Members, any questions on HB 599? Okay, seeing no questions, then we'll move on to HB 554. And this is relating, we're leaving our condo section of the agenda and we're moving on to real estate property transactions. HB 554, beginning in May of 2022, it would require sellers to disclose whether the real property lies within the sea level rise exposure area designated by the Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission or its successor. On this measure, we have our first testifier, Department of Land and Natural Resources, in support.
Yeah, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair. I'm sorry. Oh God. Sam Lemo for Suzanne Case. As you know, our office has been actively dealing with coastal inundation, coastal issues regarding sea level rise and climate change. And we continually, and I say continually, run into homeowners that contact us and that have just purchased a coastal property. And they say to us that they didn't know anything about what was happening at the shorefront. It happens quite often. I just had a call yesterday from a homeowner. The home has sold 4 times in the past 5 years on the North Shore. It's heavily distressed. It's in jeopardy of failure. And then I get a call from a new owner telling me that they didn't know anything. It's all new to them. In any case, I don't know if they're telling us the truth or what's up, but I just really feel we need to have a strong disclosure of potential effects of sea level rise on our coastal properties. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Members, I believe that's the extent of the testifiers who've indicated that they would be present for HB 554. Members, any questions for the Department of Land and Natural Resources? Okay, seeing none.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Representative Har.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Sam Lemo, can I have you come back on? Good afternoon, Sam. Thank you so much for your testimony. And I don't disagree. I guess the question I have is how, short of an appraisal, how does the homeowner, we're putting the onus on the homeowner, the seller, to be responsible to know about sea level rise? And how is the seller supposed to know that? Is it assumed that they're just going to get an appraisal? It's going to show up in the appraisal?
Well, the whole issue kind of came down to, yeah, it's a good question. We have a sea level rise viewer. We mentioned it in the testimony, and you can easily do a TMK search of your property in the viewer, and the viewer will indicate whether or not the property is in, touching, or outside the sea level rise exposure area. So when a home is sold, let me just default to a real estate agent. The real estate agent the onus would be on them to look at our viewer and to disclose to the prospective buyer if the property is in the Slerexa. Beyond that, I'm not really sure how it would work.
Okay, and again, I support the bill, but I think from a practical standpoint, the concern I have is I represented homeowners who are sellers, and Buyers later came back to them who said, you failed to disclose, and they had no idea. They went through, they even had an appraiser, they had their real estate agent. So the lawsuits were filed and the real estate agents were on the hook. They got off for $300 for their insurance. And there was still no remedy for either the seller or the buyer. And so I'm just trying to figure out, like, when you talk about the sea level rise exposure, how often is it a map? Are we talking about some kind of map that's on the website?
Yeah, it's an electronic. It's on a website hosted by the University of Hawaii at PAC-IOS, and we're going to produce all kinds of educational materials and brochures, and we're continually trying to spread the word about the existence of this sea level rise exposure area. And I've given presentation to like real estate groups on the island, and we'll continue to do that. Yeah, I agree that we do need to, and this is why it probably has an effective date, maybe a little bit later, so we can sort of try to prepare the industry to be aware of this information.
And then, Sam, again, let me play devil's advocate. So
Yeah.
what if you have the homeowner who chooses not to use a real estate agent?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very good question.
That's all I'm just, I support this measure. I think this is a good bill. The problem is from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure how you're going to, again, you're putting the onus on the seller when that may not necessarily be the correct party, or, I don't know. I apologize. I haven't looked at the entire bill. Is there some type of civil liability if they fail to disclose?
No.
Okay, so then if there's no teeth to it, then why are we doing it?
Well, it's not about penalizing people or punishing people.
It's just about the disclosure.
It's just educational, Rep. Carr.
Okay.
And look, if it doesn't reach everybody immediately, it's not the end of the world. It will reach 95% of the industry, and it basically is simply that it's adding additional information to an already existing disclosure requirement in the statutes.
Sam, one last question. Sorry, is this similar? This sea level rise? That's on the UH website. Is it similar to the flood insurance rate maps that FEMA puts out?
It's similar in the form of it being, that type of geographic information system, sort of description or layout. But it's not for, those maps are for flood events. These maps don't address, these maps are not like flood events like tsunami or hurricane events. These maps indicate that the property is going to be affected by sea level rise over the course of the century.
Okay, and so how often is it updated? Because I have to believe that it's going to be changing. It's not just going to be a static document, that at some point, because of the way climate change, everything that's happening, it will be updated. So, and again, me, I'm just playing devil's advocate. So what if I just, as a seller, I rely on one map and that's the one I disclose? And again, I get it. There's no teeth in this. There's no enforcement. But again, now am I liable for not disclosing the correct map? Or, I guess these are just all these things that I know they need to be fleshed out. It's just things to think about because, again, me, I'm always very pragmatic about things. And I've just gone through these things, when I've represented clients. And I just, again, I think this is a great bill and I want to see it go forward, but let's figure out a way to make it work.
Sure. And that's why it's sort of, there's been different iterations of this measure. Mm-hmm. I think you're looking at the very simple measure. It's basically just adding another item to the list of required disclosures. I think the real estate industry probably has its own internal procedures or guidelines or bylaws or whatever you might call them that, direct you on how to use that data and what the implications of not using it correctly are. But we're providing basically a basic layer of information that we think should be disclosed with coastal real estate transactions. And it's going to be really up to the industry how it wants to do that. We're doing everything we can to make sure the maps are as user friendly as possible,
Right.
and reflect the projections that we feel are going to be happening. Not just our reflection; these are international projections of sea level rise, which we adapted to the Hawaii scenario. And there will be updates.
Okay. Right, and that's to be assumed.
Yeah.
Sam, I don't mean to interrupt. Did you get a chance to see the testimony of Ken Hiraki from the Hawaii Association of Realtors?
I have not looked at that.
Okay, they do support the bill, but they said that, you know, as an industry, you know, they've been proactive on the issue of climate change. And they said, we have created an oceanfront property addendum and have included the following language within the disclosure section of our purchase contract. And the language says climate changes and natural hazards. Climate changes, including sea level rise, could affect properties in Hawaii, particularly those at the shoreline and in coastal areas. All properties in Hawaii are also subject to natural hazards such as hurricanes, storms, earthquakes, tsunamis, blah, blah. Buyer is advised to consult experts of buyer's choice regarding any questions concerning the effects of climate change and natural hazards that may affect the property. And then they cite the climateadaptation.hawaii.gov website. So they're putting the onus back on the buyer. Are you okay with that?
Well, I'm okay with it, but I'm also okay with, you know, HB 554, you know, moving along.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Sam. Thank you,
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Members, any other questions on HB 554? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 96, relating to agricultural buildings. This increases the maximum area for each agricultural shade cloth structure, cold frame, and greenhouse that could qualify the structure for an exemption from the building permit and building code requirements. On HB 96, first we have the Department of Agriculture in support.
Excuse me, good afternoon, Chair Johansson and members of the committee. Department of Agriculture supports this measure. I'll be present to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We also have the University of Hawaii in support, Jeff Goodwin.
Yes, UH Manoa and CTAR strongly supports this bill for the positive influence it has on agriculture and reducing pesticide use and crop production and increasing the yield. So it's strongly supported by CTAR and UH Manoa. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, please note that that is the extent of testifiers present on this measure, HB 96, but we also have support proffered by various organizations and individuals in support of this measure. Members, any questions on HB 96? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to HB 125. This is relating to the Uniform Employee and Student Online Privacy Protection Act. This is our perennial measure that I feel like I saw for all 4 years as favorite chair. This would establish, it's based on model legislation establishing the Uniform Employee and Student Online Privacy Protection Act that adopts uniform laws on protecting the online accounts of employees, prospective employees, unpaid interns, applicants, students, and prospective students from employers and educational institutions. On this measure, we have the Department of Education in support.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Brooke Connor from the Department of Education, standing on our written testimony in support and available for questions.
Thank you very much. We also have in support the Uniform Law Commission, Blake Oshiro.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. Blake Oshiro on behalf of the Commission to promote uniform legislation. I stand on our written testimony in support and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's the extent of our present testifiers. Please note that there's also supportive testimony proffered by the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission on this measure. Members, any questions on HB 125? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to HB 542. This is relating to Uniform Controlled Substances Act. It removes cannabidiol drugs that have been approved by the US FDA from the list of Schedule 5 substances for consistency with federal laws. Let's see. Okay, we have Greenwich Biosciences in support. Naheelani Webster.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Naheelani Webster testifying on behalf of Greenwich Biosciences in support of HB 542. I just want to clarify that this measure only applies to the specific chemical formula of Epidiolex, which is currently the only FDA-approved plant-derived prescription cannabinoid. This medicine is for the treatment of 2 rare forms of childhood onset epilepsy. Descheduling will conform with recent updates in federal law and improve access for patients. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and available if you have questions.
Thank you very much. Members, that's the extent of testifiers present on HB 542. Any questions for Greenwich Biosciences? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item. This is relating to alcohol, HB 593, and this would expand the definition of beer to specify an alcohol by volume of no less than 0.5% and to include alcoholic self-serve beverages. On HB 593, we have, let's see, Department of Taxation offering comments.
Good afternoon, Chair Jacob Hurlitz on behalf of the Department of Taxation. We'll stand on our written testimony offering comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have, let's see, Cindy Goldstein, Hawaiian Craft Brewers Guild in support.
Good afternoon, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair Kitagawa, and members of the committee. Cindy Goldstein, Executive Director of the Hawaiian Craft Brewers Guild. We're in support of this bill. It updates the definition of beer, and it includes additional ingredients that are used in brewing, and it also includes fermented seltzers under the definition of beer. This would conform more closely to the federal definition under the TTB and the Internal Revenue Code for their definition of beer. One of the other advantages, this could bring additional revenue to the state of Hawaii in the form of both beer excise tax and gallonage tax. And another benefit would be the broader use of agricultural ingredients. As the styles of beer are broadened, there's opportunities to use additional Hawaii-grown agricultural ingredients. So we'd be very happy to answer any questions you may have, and thank you for the opportunity for testimony today.
Thank you. Members, that's the extent of our present testifiers on HB 593. Please note that there is also additional supportive testimony from various organizations and companies, as well as comments. Members, any questions on HB 593? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next measure, HB 680, relating to human remains. This allows the use of traditional Hawaiian burial practices in the treatment and disposal of human remains, which includes the use of alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction. It amends procedures for the resolution of disputes regarding the right of disposition, right to rely and act upon written instructions in a funeral service agreement, or similar documents, and provisions for the disposition of a decedent's remains and recovery of reasonable expenses to include hydrolysis facilities and natural organic reduction facilities. It's a very diverse subject matter on today's agenda. First off, we have the Hawaiian Memorial Life Plan in opposition. Jay Morford.
I won't be testifying virtually for this company. I'll be testifying on behalf of Hawaiian Memorial Life Plan. I mean, the Hawaii Funeral and Cemetery Association.
Okay, which is next? So why don't you proceed as the Hawaii Funeral and Cemetery Association in opposition?
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. My name is Jay Morford. I am the president of the Hawaii Funeral and Cemetery Association, representing them on this matter. The HFCA, they represent 14 mortuaries and 10 of the regulated cemeteries in the state of Hawaii. The purpose of our opposition on this bill isn't that we're opposed to bringing in alternative types of disposition into the state of Hawaii. Our primary concern is regarding these two dispositions. There's two segments of this bill. There's a natural organic reduction, for layman's terms, is human composting. And then there's alkaline hydrolysis, which is a form of water cremation. So there's two segments of the bill. In regards to the composting part, we're concerned about how potentially 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of human compost will be transported from a composting facility into family's residence or into the community, and how that will be transported and taken care of by the family, and what regulatory agencies should be involved in that type of permitting. In regard to the alkaline hydrolysis, the water cremation, our concern on that is regarding the water discharge into the sewer system regarding pH levels. And primarily bringing this bill in is to allow the Hawaiian community to practice traditional Hawaiian burial practices, which we're in strong support of. However, we do have concerns regarding the regulatory agency's overview of this process in regards to permitting. In my testimony for the HFCA, you'll see a photograph of the human remains that will be taken from that facility and then interred somewhere on the islands. And currently in the state of Hawaii, a cremation disposition does not require a burial permit. You can take cremated remains and scatter them anywhere in the state of Hawaii without a permit. These are right now are being treated as such. So right now, if these facilities were to come in, we'd have no governmental oversight or permitting process to ensure that these remains are being are interred properly. So that's where our opposition stands on this measure. It's more about regulatory agency oversight.
Thank you.
And I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Dean Fisher with Fisher and Associates Consulting and Support.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you for your time today and allowing me to testify in support of HB 680. I am Dean Fisher. I'm a licensed funeral director. My background, Bachelor of Science in Mortuary Science from the University of Minnesota. I've had a 37-year career in funeral service, and I've worked at the Mayo Clinic and the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine. Both of these great institutions invested in the resumption water cremation technology. This is the same technology that Aloha Mortuary is seeking approval for. It has a perfect 15-year operation and safety record. It's completed over 5,000 dispositions during this time frame, just so you understand. Minnesota was the first state to allow alkaline hydrolysis for humans back in 2006. Since then, 20 other states have approved the use of this, including Washington, Oregon, and now California. Current burial and cremation practices are outdated. They're harming the environment. Toxic embalming fluids, pathogens, DNA, and other body fluids are going into the sanitation system without being treated. Alkaline hydrolysis releases a sterile effluent with no pathogens or DNA in it. Carbon dioxide, mercury, and polycarbons from flame crematories are going into the atmosphere and adding to our current global warming crisis. The Cremation Association of North America reported 8,507 cremations in Hawaii in 2018. This was the last year for the cremation statistics. Each cremation places an average of 534 pounds of carbon dioxide into the environment. That's over 4.5 million pounds of carbon dioxide from flame crematories in Hawaii alone. We're finding that in 60% of cremation customers where water cremation is allowed, that they choose water cremation over flame cremation. That would mean approximately 5,100 Hawaiians would select this, saving over 2.7 million pounds of carbon dioxide annually, just to give you an idea of what we could save there. We're also seeing 30% greater amount of cremated remains at the end of this process. We have reached out to the Department of Environmental Services and we are working with them and educating them on the process, the wastewater and the pH. It can easily be treated. It's the same chemical that they use to treat their water already, and they understand that. We ask for your support moving this bill forward and offering the citizens of Hawaii a safe and environmentally friendly choice in cremation. And I'll be around to answer any questions you might have at the end of this.
Thank you very much, Dean. We also have Kavehi Correa with Aloha Mortuary in support.
Aloha, aloha everybody and committee members. My name is Kavehi. Thank you for giving me the honor to share with you folks our support in this bill. There are two things that I'd like to highlight talking with your folks' committee. And the first thing is for the consumer, and the second thing would be for the regulatory standards that the opposition want to enforce here. The first is for consumers in Hawaii. Water cremation is the most gentle way that you can actually have a final disposition and final resting place for a human and their human body. So I think allowing Hawaii and and its consumers to have that is actually honoring their loved one at the best, most capacity that they can possibly do in conjunction with honoring somebody's life. So I would really hope that you folks would take that standpoint when looking at this technology. Now, the second part of the technology with the alkaline hydrolysis is that this technology is so developed that the effluent that comes out in the water can actually be regulated, kind of like what you see in a Kangen machine today. I mean, there's so much alkaline water available. You can purchase it at the store at pH 9. We're talking about slightly putting a little bit of acid in there to lower the pH, which can be easily done to have a perfectly neutral pH effluent coming out. Now, embalming, it uses formaldehyde and blood that goes right down the drain in terms of regulatory standards. Now, we're talking about crematories and their use, and the Department of Health, which does a good job in terms of air quality, but there is no regulatory standards that they have to run by every year to go off. So I just hope that when looking at this technology and this bill, that you folks offer the people of Hawaii the most gentle, eco-friendly opportunity for their loved one to have a final resting place. And then the second, in terms of the regulatory standards, is to be comparable to the other dispositions that are already available today, which is the flame cremation and the embalming and the embalming fluid for burials. Thank you very much, you folks, and thank you for your support.
Thank you. We also have Pono Ledford testifying in support as an individual.
Hello, this is Dr. Ledford. I'm actually from the Big Island of Hawaii. I'm working out of Hilo as a physician. So I'm in support of the bill. There's a lot of concern about the affluent, which is the material that comes out of the process of alkaline hydrolysis. This process is the same process used to destroy biochemical hazards. So you remove a tumor out of a patient, it goes through this process. So the process kills bacteria, kills viruses, kills purons. So even with coronavirus, we can put our loved ones in this, and let's say they do have coronavirus, this process will destroy the coronavirus. So it makes it a very safe way to take care of our loved ones. Secondly, as regards to regulation, what regulation is there when we flush our toilets at home? So the stuff we put into our toilets, right, our waste that goes on the toilets, that has bacteria, viruses, it's very toxic. Yet the stuff that comes out of this process, this alkaline hydrolysis, is sterile. So I'm not really sure what the major concern about. Yes, it comes out at a pH of 11, but anyone who's had an upset stomach and has taken Pepto-Bismol, milk of magnesia, that fluid, that milk of magnesia, that Pepto-Bismol has a pH of 11 to help neutralize the stomach acids in your stomach. So I do believe this is a very safe process. Secondly, it'll help us Native Hawaiians get back to our cultural sensitiveness, to be Hawaiian. We believe that the mana is stored in this iwi, these bones, and that's very sacred and precious to us. Flame cremations does not give us the opportunity to care for our loved ones the way in which we would like to traditionally. So I'll be around for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ledford. We also have in support Kumu Hina Wang Kalu.
Oia, ano ai ke aloha e ke anaina o ke launa ana. Luna ho kele Johansson me na luna makaena e ae. Aloha ya uko. Mahalo nui for your consideration on this bill. I view this bill as something that is extremely positive and a very meaningful upturn in terms of seeing legislation that will come before you that actually is a way to empower the Kanaka cause, and in a cause that is probably one of the most profound that anyone will experience in the course of their life. There's birth and there's death. And when we think of everything that we do in between, this is what you and I, all of us here on this meeting, are speaking about. It's the in-between, that birth and that death. So I ask that you would kindly consider enabling a method that is consistent with supporting traditional Kanaka views and ways to procure the iwi, the bones of our ancestors. As you heard in other testimony, there are other ways of cremation. However, through water cremation, we are able to cleanly procure these iwi, and we are then able to be responsible for their final disposition in a manner consistent with being Kanaka in our own home. And thus, the kuleana, the great responsibility that some in the Hawaiian community would be honored and be so very thankful to have, is now before you for your consideration, that you would empower us to truly be Kanaka. There's many things that allow us to decoratively and symbolically be Kanaka, but when it comes to that adage that we are well familiar with, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Well, in the current method of taking care of one's remains and with embalming and some of the more popular forms today, one can only question just how true really is ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This enables us to continue that life cycle and allow us to pass from this world and on to the next in a Kanaka way. And I ask you again humbly for your support on this bill, and I'm very appreciative of this time. Mahalo nui ya uko. Aloha.
Thank you, Kumu. Members, please note that that's the extent of our testimony from testifiers indicating they would be present today. Please note that there are additional testimonies offered in opposition and support from various organizations and individuals on this measure, HB 680. Members, any questions on HB 680? Representative Mizuno.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question for.
You might need to turn off your computer.
It's on.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. Who, Hina or anyone else? I like the measure before us. I'm just curious, as a layperson, how much water does the cremation process take? Just again, I'm a layperson. I want to know about the process. Approximately how much water does this take?
I'd be happy to answer that for you. So at UCLA, the average cremation took 270 gallons of fluid. So that was from the start of the process through all the way till the end of the process. And when you think about that, that's quite a bit. But if you take 5,100 deaths there in Hawaii, and you took that times 300 gallons per cycle, you're a little over, what is it, 15 million gallons. But the water treatment plant there in Honolulu treats 110 million gallons of water a day. So if everybody was to die in one day and we treated them all in that day, it would be less than 1 hour's work to process all of the water for all of the Native Hawaiians. So it's very small in the big scheme of water recycling, just so you understand that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any additional questions? If not, maybe I have one. Kavehi Korea, are you still there with Aloha Mortuary?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Just because I'm less familiar with traditional and customary Native Hawaiian burial practices, I understand sort of hydrolysis with respect to comporting better with traditional practices. Between hydrolysis and natural organic reduction, are they both equally important, or is one more, I guess, I'm just trying to understand because I don't know much about natural organic reduction. So I'm just wondering, on the scale of things, are they both equal in terms of importance, or is hydrolysis potentially more important, the more important germane part of this bill?
I believe that the hydrolysis is the more important part of this bill. However, I mean, there have been development in Washington and many other places that have figured out how to decompose a body back into compost. But the majority, the language within the bill was utilized to be set as known as. So alkaline hydrolysis, to answer your question, would be the more important. And then the natural reduction is actually just a definition term of that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Of course. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item. HB 782 relating to licensing. This allows a person who is married to an active duty member of the National Guard, military reserves, or armed forces, accompanies his or her spouse on a permanent change of station to Hawaii, and holds a current unencumbered license in another jurisdiction in specific professions to apply for licensure on an expected basis in the state of Hawaii. We have the Department of Defense in support or offering comments. Brigadier Mitsuyoshi.
Hey, hello, this is Brigadier General Moses. We'll testify on this one. Aloha, Chair Johansson and Chair Kirigawa, members of the committee. I'm speaking on behalf of the State Department of Defense and Major General Hara, and we appreciate HB 782's attempt to benefit military families with inclusive employment opportunities based on the relationship. We stand on our written testimony as submitted, specifically comments that we provide is to take a look at the language on pages 3, between the 11 and 14 lines, to include the term temporary license in there. We'll stand by for the question. Or the general here, please on as well.
Okay, thank you. We also have Kelly Mae Douglas offering comments, the U.S. Department of Defense State Liaison Office.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee for hearing my comments. I have submitted the letter that I stand on, my comments in that in that form. But I do want to just make a couple of highlighting comments here in person. So this bill, HB 782 HD1, has the potential to significantly move Hawaii forward in the eyes of the U.S. Department of Defense in the effort to continue to facilitate increased career portability for military spouses. I do have two key changes that I would like to just highlight that we're requesting consideration as an amendment. But I do want to just kind of overall express how important this issue is. It's something that the Biden administration, through Jill Biden's Joining Forces initiative that she's brought back, it's one of the most important priorities for her, is ensuring that military spouses can continue their career as they follow their service member from state to state. So with this bill, the changes that I'm recommending have to do with the temporary licensure piece. So what the Department of Defense is looking at two pieces. One is that this bill is definitely streamlining endorsement for military spouses, which we appreciate. However, there are two pieces to the temporary section. One still requires substantial equivalency for the temporary license, and the other one allows for a board to require supervision of the person while they're practicing under the temporary license. And so we would just ask that you look at that section, and realizing that the temporary license allows the spouse to start working while she or he meets the full requirements for the endorsement. And that's outside of the 30 occupations that are already listed in the bill. So just really appreciate your consideration, and thanks for hearing my comments, and I stand by for any questions.
Thank you very much. We also have Alani Kiyoki with the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs Professional and Vocational Licensing Division offering comments.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. The department will stand on its written comments, appreciating the intent of the bill. I would like to state that the department does prefer House Bill 961, the Department of Defense's administration bill, which is a collaborative effort between the two departments. However, should the committee pass out this particular measure, DCCA does respectfully request adding mental health counselors to Section 1, Paragraph 2A, as it was inadvertently omitted. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii in support, Jason Chung.
Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, thank you for this opportunity. Jason Chung, Vice President of Military Affairs Council, Chamber of Commerce Hawaii. We strongly support House Bill 782. Just one key point to highlight: this is definitely not about taking jobs away from the local community. You know, the military is part of the community, and has been since 1898. This is really about supporting all members of the community and adding much needed capabilities in areas that we're in need of qualified professionals. Appreciate the time to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, that's the extent of our testimony on this measure. We also have additional testimony from an organization in support on HB 782. Members, any questions on HB 782? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to a substantially similar measure, HB 961. This is relating to military dependents. This is also a little bit more expansive and would enable dependents to potentially serve in state and county jobs as well. Let's see. On this measure, we have the State Department of Defense in support.
Aloha, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair Kitagawa, and members of the committee. Brigadier General Neil Matsuyoshi testifying on behalf of Major General Kenneth Hara. The Department of Defense stands on its written testimony in support, and I just want to offer one comment. Should the committee decide to pass House Bill 782, I'd just like to ask that the portion that reflects military dependent exemptions for residency in the state of Hawaii or to work for the state of Hawaii also be carried in House Bill 961, and will be available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Kelly Mae Douglas again offering comments from the U.S. Department of Defense State Liaison Office.
Yes, thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee again for listening to my comments. Again, I'll just reiterate what the last speaker mentioned, that these bills are definitely very similar. And in fact, there's four bills that are very similar. And so the comments that I provided in written testimony provides a recommendation to combine key pieces of all four bills to create what we think would be an ideal solution for Hawaii and for military spouses. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Alani Kyogi again with the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs Professional and Vocational Licensing Division in support.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I will stand on my written testimony in support of this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, he's no longer here. Do we still have Jason Chung with the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii in support?
Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, thank you again. We stand on our testimony in strong support. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's the extent of our testifiers present on this particular measure. Members, any questions on HB 961? Okay, seeing no questions, we will recess for decision making. Recess. Okay, reconvening the Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee's 2 p.m. agenda this Thursday, February 25th. Thank you to everyone who participated in our virtual hearing today, as well as the members for their patience. First off, we have HB 221. This is relating to condominiums. I think great arguments were made on both sides. So I'd like to basically preserve the status quo and delete the portion of the proposed, or deleting the proposed deletion of the option for owners to give the proxy. So it would preserve the status quo there, would have that effect, which was the portion of the bill that got substantial opposition. But for discussion purposes, I would like to keep the second portion of the bill over whether or not solicitations of proxies should come from employees of the association. So want to continue to have that discussion, so we'll preserve that part of the bill, as well as inserting a defective date of January 1, 2015. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, then Vice Chair, please, for the vote.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 221 with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Aquino? Representative Har? Okay. Excused. Representative Hashem? Representative Kong is excused. Representative Mizuno? Representative Morikawa? Representative Onishi?
Aye.
Representative Tarnes?
Aye.
Representative Matsumoto?
Aye.
Representative Har is there.
Okay. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Just her picture.
No, she's not.
I'm sorry. Aye.
Oh,
Sorry.
Representative Har. Okay, Representative Har is an
I
aye.
couldn't push, sorry. Aye.
Got it. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, members, we have HB 305 relating to condominiums. The recommendation here will just be to insert a defective date of January 1, 2015. And for those watching, that's just to ensure that we have to take a look at it again in case there's something else that we need to amend in the future. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, Vice Chair, for the vote, please.
Recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 305 with amendments, noting the excused absence of Representative Kong, who will be noted excused for the rest of this agenda. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, members, HB 307 relating to common interest communities. The recommendation here is to defer this measure. So defer on HB 307. Reason being because I think much of the important part of the contents of 307 is also contained within our next measure, HB 599, relating to association governance. I'd like to take the Hawaii Council of Association of Apartment Owners amendments, which is echoed in various of the stakeholders' testimonies as well, same amendments, inserting a defective date of January 1, 2015, and also my thanks especially to all the stakeholders for working together to arrive at this proposed measure and its revisions. I appreciate your collaboration in advance of the hearing. Members, any comments or questions on HB 599's recommendation? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, Vice Chair, for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 599 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, members, on HB 554 relating to real property transactions. The recommendation here would be to adopt the Office of Planning's amendments to insert a defective date of January 1, 2015, and also note in the committee report why the ultimate effective date of May 1st, 2022 needs to be restored if we're to pass this measure, just so that we don't lose track of it. And my thanks for the prior concurrence and assistance of the Water and Land Chair for these amendments. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, Vice Chair, for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 554 HD1 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, on HB 96 relating to agricultural buildings. Also, my thanks to the Chair of Agriculture Committee for their prior concurrence here. Just out of abundance of caution, we'll insert an effective date of January 1, 2050 and send it over to the Senate. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 96 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, on HB 125 relating to the Uniform Employee and Student Online Privacy Protection Act. Again, my thanks to Labor Chair Onishi for his work here. This might be the year on this perennial bill based off of model national legislation. As it has a defective date, the recommendation is to move this measure as is and unamended. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 125 HD2 as is. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, on HB 542 relating to the Uniform Controlled Substances Act. Thanks to the prior concurrence of the Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs Chair, we're simply going to defect the date in this measure to January 1, 2050, just out of an abundance of caution. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 542 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, on HB 593 relating to alcohol, the date is already defective. The recommendation here is just to move this measure as is, unamended. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 593 HD1 as is. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, members, on HB 680 relating to human remains. I think it's a really interesting discussion that will continue. For now, I'm going to recommend that we defer this House measure as there are two Senate measures also crossing over to the House to give us some additional time for discussion on this issue. So on HB 680, the recommendation is to defer. On HB 782 relating to licensing, the recommendation here is also to defer this measure. And lastly, on HB 961 relating to military dependents, the recommendation is to pass this measure with the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs suggested amendment, various technical and non-substantive amendments, as well as the insertion of a defective date of January 1, 2050. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 961 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, this hearing is adjourned.